The African Union Development Agency, NEPAD, has turned 20. And to mark this milestone, the agency held a symposium this week titled NEPAD at 20, Building the Africa We Want. Heads of state, including Presidents Ramaphosa and Paul Kagame, joined other former leaders and stakeholders to look back at NEPAD's achievements and some of the challenges that still need to be overcome as the continent looks to the future, particularly post-COVID-19. I caught up with the agency's Director of Program Delivery and Coordination, Mr. Amine Idriss Adoum, soon after the symposium. So NEPAD is 20 years old, 2 decades. Take us back to 20 years ago. Why was the agency set up in the first instance?
But there were 3 reasons, actually, basically. I think early 2020, African leaders thought that time has come really after we have fought for the liberation, for the political liberation of the continent, to start strengthening our countries and to go toward more economic integration. That was the very first, actually, reason. Number 2, they thought as well that Africa must take over. Africa actually must lead herself, her own development, building her own narrative. And there is no way to leave it to other people to do. That was the second reason. And the third reason, obviously, as well, and it's a little bit more tactical, really, leaders wanted an agency at the time that will actually drive the implementation of most of the continental development agenda. That were actually the 3 main reasons that led to the creation of NEPAD at the time.
And what would you say have been your achievements in 20 years? I mean, those were quite big ambitions. And in 20 years, a lot of people would say you should have been able to do quite a bit. Have you been able to achieve quite a bit?
We did what we have to do, and we did a lot, in fact. I will give you 3 examples. Number 1, the design of the PIDA, Program for Infrastructure Development for Africa. That is a huge program that is supposed actually to help the continent to build infrastructure, road infrastructure, railway infrastructure, but also energy infrastructure, social infrastructures as well, road, railway, port, airports, all those things put together. And since we're all actually looking for one Africa, we need to integrate. So the objective of the PIDA is to integrate all the African countries using infrastructure and connectivity. We have defined this program and we have done a lot. In fact, it's true, it's not very much, I would say, visible, because we used to be a policy organization, bringing leaders together to discuss, to agree on what needs to be done, then help them to put actually into national plan what they have agreed at the continental level. So it's a back office job. That's why people wouldn't see us, but most of the roads that have been built in Africa, the last 15 years, I would say, most of the railways, most of the highways that were connecting countries, bridges that were connecting countries, connecting regions, actually, they are the results of the PIDA, which is the job, the work of NEPAD. The other one is the CADEP, which is the Comprehensive Africa Agriculture Development Program. We succeeded actually to convince our member states to invest more into agriculture for 2 reasons. Number 1, Africa needs to self-sustain, actually have access to food. So we need to nourish ourselves. Not only few African countries actually have what we call are self-sufficient in terms of food production. We still continue to import a lot. That's number 1. Number 2, agriculture is also one of the areas that employ most of our people. As you know, 70% at least of African citizens are rural citizens still. So we need a comprehensive agriculture development program that works at the continental level, regional level, but also national level. We succeeded to convince member states to dedicate at least 10% of their GDP, 10% of their national budget actually to agricultural development. And it has been done. It was achieved, actually. After the CADEP, we had the Malabo Protocol, and people did it. So of course, here again, it's a background, I would say, back office job. People don't necessarily see us on the ground with big cars running to do development, because that's another way of doing development, influencing policies, making sure that those policies are established. This is the second achievement. And of course, you have as well another achievement, actually. Today, if you look at Africa Continental Free Trade Area, we don't appear up front, but we were actually one of the biggest players, in fact. The idea started with NEPAD, 20 years ago. Then it has a political dimension. The Commission actually have been pushing, the African Union Commission have been dealing with the political dimension. And the NEPAD agency have been working with member states, with regional economic communities to convince people at the technical level that this is where we need to go, we shall go. And that as well actually happened. So if you ask me, did we do something? Yes, we did, definitely.
All right. I mean, it sounds like quite a number of initiatives that you certainly have been able to influence over time. So today you had a very important symposium, and when one looks at the agenda, there was a lot of people, President Ramaphosa, President Kagame, a number of key players on the continent in various areas of endeavor. And I just wonder, from your perspective, what were some of the highlights that came through and some of the more important messages that came through?
There are basically two. I think people come today to celebrate what was done, and the idea that we all come together to start building our own narrative when it comes to development. And everybody agreed on that one. But the second highlight, I would say, which is, in my opinion, the most important, is thinking about the future. How are we going to define the future? Especially that we are all actually dealing with a pandemic that the humanity have not seen for the last 100 years, 105 years, since the last, actually, Spanish flu. There have never been any pandemic at this level. And this pandemic is disturbing everything. People are talking about disruption as well. It disrupts, but it disturbs. It disturb our social life, our family lives. It disrupts as well our economy. And we have seen the world moving into a new era. So how would Africa actually manage, number one, the pandemic, to make sure that we come out of it stronger? But secondly, how are we going as well to make sure that the economic, the social, but also the political consequences of this pandemic will not hit us harder than any other region of the world? And thirdly, and which is more important than ever, how are we going to utilize actually all the disruption, the disturbances that are coming from this pandemic as an opportunity to grow better, stronger, So those are the key messages that were delivered by all the heads of states, the economists, the opinion leaders, the scientists, all the partners who attended this symposium today. Thinking about the future, defining the future is actually what matters to all of us.
Can I just perhaps put it to you that COVID-19 has disrupted and disguised, actually, problems that were there already? Because I could have asked you this question before COVID-19. Agenda 2063 was already in place before COVID-19, and there was a recognition that there were issues, we were not making progress, we were not doing the right things in a number of areas, and that we now talk about post-COVID as if that was the problem in our face, and it really wasn't. It's just become another one. So I guess where I'm going with this is, how do we go back to pre-COVID? Because those problems still exist. All that COVID has done has exacerbated them.
But do we really need to go to pre-COVID? We need to move, actually. Pre-COVID was not something we like it, by the way. No African citizen, no African leaders actually was proud about the pre-COVID situation at the social level, at the political level, but also at the economical level. Our education system was not good. Our health system was not good. Our economic system were quite weak. Most of our countries were facing actually governance issues. So nobody would say, let's go back to pre-COVID. Nobody liked it, in fact. We had to deal with pre-COVID. Now, while we are talking about COVID, we are not telling people that because of the COVID, everything is going to be different. We're going to do things differently. We believe that COVID is an opportunity as well for all Africans, leaders, but also citizens like you and me, scientists, researchers, opinion leaders, to pause while fighting with the pandemic, to also self-reflect. Why are we today in this situation? Look at this. Actually, Africa uses 100 million diagnostic for HIV every year, but yet we don't have diagnostics prepared, manufactured in the continent. No? So now, of course, many people pretend that they have discovered that now, but the COVID clearly show us that we are weak. Really, apart from, I would say, we have been able to cope because we are resilient. I would say history made us resilient, but our systems are quite weak. We are exposed. We had to import everything. We have to import diagnostic. We have to rely on others for the vaccines. And even at the economic level, we have now to go to international institutions, to bilateral cooperation to ask for money. So what would be different? I think COVID is a wake-up call to that is telling us, let's accelerate the implementation of Agenda 2063.
Okay, I hear that explanation and it sounds great, but then let's look at some areas. You mentioned agriculture, the Malabo Protocol, and you and I both know that there are many countries that haven't lived up to this commitment. Then we look at women in agriculture. 70% of agriculture on the continent has female hands on it, but they are the least in terms of land ownership and real economic empowerment in terms of agriculture. How do we build the Africa we want when we have these big issues to deal with? Is there the political will and is there the energy towards creating equality and empowering those people that are already working the land?
The beauty of the job that we are doing at ODA and NEPAD, and I think with any development practitioner, is we understand that development is not sectoral. So you can't actually pretend we are going to fix the issue of agriculture, just by focusing on agriculture. To address the issue of agriculture, and you said it rightly, women don't have access really to land. They don't own land, right? How do you fix it? This is a legislative process. It has to do with governance. It has to do with politics and with policy design, policy development, policy implementation. It also has to do with national, sociological barriers. That don't have anything, I would say, to do with access to money or access to technology or even the power of the leaders. So there is a social work that needs to be done. And if you look at actually today, the situation, if you compare actually Africa situation in 1960 and today in terms of access to land or ownership of land for women, the situation have evolved a lot. Why it has evolved? Number one, because of the work of the civil society. Civil society have been pushing, making sure that things change. Civil society have been as well influencing leaders, that one. But in addition to that, there is a lot of work that have been done by the agencies like ODA NEPAD agency to advise policy makers about how to make sure that they will cope with the changing demographic, with the changing economic landscape, with the changing technology, and how they can actually bring women, in the decision-making process. So countries like Rwanda are a great example. I think countries even like South Africa are making huge progress. And what we are doing actually at ODA NEPAD is bringing countries together to learn from each other. So if other countries have tried and it works, the other as well can try and it's going to work. But they just need to know and they just need to be sensitized. So I think that people need as well to understand that nothing will change overnight in Africa. Yes, many things are still quite annoying, I would say. Believe me, all of us, we are very much annoyed, because we believe that we are not making the progress at the speed that we must actually. But at the same time, let's recognize as well that those who have made the effort, especially to bring some changes, they are succeeding somehow, especially in the area of agriculture. Now, in agriculture, there is one problem that remains. Despite all the efforts that African countries are putting, Africa is still a net importer of food, right? And yet we pretend that we are, agriculture is the first, I would say, pillar of our economies in most of our countries. And that problem have a lot to do, number one, with policies, of course, with capacity as well, especially technical capacities. It's also the product of the history. Around 1990, 1995, IMF, World Bank, and many international organizations have brought this structural adjustment program, SAP, that actually made governments to stop investing into capacity building for agriculture. So in most of the countries, people stop. That's number one. Number two, most of the African countries where their agriculture program is very much relying on export instead of food security. Some of them are exporting cocoa, other one are exporting actually, I would say, cotton, because they were looking for foreign currencies. But then we realized that this is not the area where we should go. We should as well now put aside this colonial mentality, that was driving our agriculture system for decades, and reinvent ourselves the way we must do agriculture. And actually that's ongoing.
All right, so we talk about agriculture, and it's just one example, but I think one of the things that you said, which was very important, is about a holistic view and outlook in terms of developing the continent. And one of those issues is governance. It's countries having a minimum standard in terms of how countries are run, law and order is observed and policed, and how elections should be run. There are people sitting here today who are watching from Uganda, for example, and cannot believe that an opposition leader can be boxed in their own house after an election by the police and the military, that in Nigeria, that soldiers could be deployed on the streets and they shoot people, that in Zimbabwe, that you could be jailed for a tweet. Now, I've just pointed to some examples, but we look to the African Union, of which you are very much a part, and we look to the African Union to create a culture across the continent, minimum standards of governance, so that the continent can develop. Is that happening? Because most of the time I hear people saying the AU is letting us down.
I think 2 years ago, I was talking to a journalist who was telling me that the AU is so useless and we can survive without the AU. And I told him, listen, I'm sure that without the AU, and I've been working at the Commission at that time in Addis Ababa, without the African Union and all its organs, probably Africa would have been in more trouble. People can't imagine what the AU is doing. First, to prevent conflict, at the national level. There is a lot of work that are being put actually together to make sure that at least at the country level, people discuss. People align themselves. People share at least the same vision. That's the job of the African Union, and African Union leaders are doing it. And they are not doing just by talking. They have created mechanism. You have the African governance architecture that is driving all this work. You have the African peace and security architecture that help to manage conflict when conflicts happen. And then you have other instruments that coerce states that don't necessarily agree, accept, or states or governments that violate their own constitutions. So African Union is doing a lot in that part. That's number one. Number two, if you ask me, is there any change between 1990, let's say 1995? I was not even at university in 1994, right? And today, and I can compare, 1995 and today. 1995, you can make noise. Nobody will listen to you, really. unless you go violent. But today, I have seen countries where leaders actually backtrack because they could see what's happening in terms of noise in the social media, in the classic media as well. So civil society is becoming as well much more stronger.
We're starting to come to the end of our conversation, and I think the next big project for us is the African Continental Free Trade Agreement. And a lot of our development is really going to hinge around that. Are you confident that Africans across the continent are going to see themselves as Pan-Africans? Because the reality is, whilst goods may move across the continent, one of the big things is going to be the movement of people. And I wonder if there's enough political will to allow that. What's been your observation? And I guess this is something also that's important to you as a UN agency.
As an AU agency, not UN.
AU, sorry.
AU agency. So let me put it that way. Continental Free Trade Area actually have kind of, I would say, hidden positive dimension that people don't necessarily see, which is to strengthen first even the national integration. Because the truth is that in many African countries, citizens of the same country don't necessarily feel like they are all brothers and sisters, because of you have ethnicity, tribalism, regionalism, all those actually fights that are happening within the same country. So now imagine you have as a country the opportunity really to trade better with your neighbors and with other countries as well at the continent. What would you do? You need to make sure that you control your own market. Controlling your own market means actually pushing toward more national integration. So that's actually one of the first steps. One of the ideal, I would say, of the African Union since 1963 by the inception. So Continental Free Trade Area would actually make as well a kind of national free trade area to become a reality. And believe me, it's not that, because there is no legal issues at the national level, as such, to block people from trading from one area to another. Most of those issues that they have in the countries actually are more about their own sociological issues, their own internal history, right? So using Continental Free Trade Area will bring people together. That's number one. Number two, I would say it expands your market. Obviously, non-tariff barriers would be actually deleted. Tariff barriers will be reduced. Rule of origin will be harmonized. Those kind of things. That will go specifically with free movement of people. If you look at actually the numbers, let's say 2010, there were less than 15 African countries that were allowing other African citizens to come in their countries without passport. We are above 35 now today, more than half in less than 10 years. So in the next 10 years, I'm pretty sure that we would achieve as well the 100% of African citizens, being able to freely move from one country to another. It's no longer a political problem. It's just, I would call it a social engineering problem and legal engineering problem. How to make it actually happen. It's on the good way.
I'm so glad that we've had this conversation, and I feel the optimism oozing out of you, which is great. Agenda 2063, and I just wonder, will we be at the Africa that we want by 2063 or substantially there as a final thought?
I think 2063 is tomorrow. And how would Agenda 2063 be? First, we would achieve the Africa at peace with herself. That one, I think, would come. We would achieve as well what we want in terms of economic development, to become a medium income, at least, countries, all of us together. An Africa where people actually can freely move from one place to another. And an Africa that owns her own narrative, but then an Africa that starts really contributing significantly, to the development of the world at intellectual level, economic level, technological level. An Africa that have shared as well some of her values, about living the diversity. Because believe me, people don't realize today that we are probably the most diverse continent in the world. More than 2,000 languages in this continent, among the 1.3 billion people. That's unique, and this actually wealth of culture, we shall be able to start sharing it and for the world to appreciate it fully when we will be at peace with ourselves. And that will happen by 2063, I'm pretty sure. I will still be there anyway,
I'm very excited.
And you will be there as well.
I'm very excited to hear this, and I'm sure that our viewers look forward to this Africa that they want desperately, that we all want desperately. And I hope that they hear this message, that things are moving forwards. I think sometimes we get caught up in the narrative of today and not realize just how much progress we've been making. Mr. Amine Idriss Adoum, the Director for Program Delivery and Coordination at the African Union Development Agency, NEPAD, thank you for your time, sir.